where it's called, and it is called Matched Up. So if you were trying to get the last messages that we did in the last 2-3 weeks, understand that you can watch a really nice picture, but there's absolutely no sound. Somehow or another, I got switched from microphone to line in, and there's no line in on this computer. So we're going to be looking in Isaiah today. Now, let me point out some things. You know, we all deal with struggles and hardships and trials, and so we're going to be looking at the book of Isaiah as a way of kind of understanding how we deal with trauma biblically. So let me read, and this is Isaiah 6, and this is verses 1 through 2, and this one's from the God's Words edition. In the year King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a high and lofty throne. The bottom of his robe filled the temple, and the angels were standing above him. Each had 6 wings. With 2 they covered their face, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. And they called to each other, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of all armies. The whole earth is filled with his glory. Their voices shook the foundations of the doorpost, and the temple was filled with smoke. So I said, Oh, no, I am doomed. Every word that passes through my lips is sinful. I live among people with sinful lips. I have seen the King, the Lord of armies. Then one of the angels flew to me, and in his hand was a burning coal that he had taken from an altar with tongs. And he touched my mouth with it and said, This has touched your lips. Your guilt has been taken away, and your sin has been forgiven. And then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send? Who will go for us? And I said, Here am I, send me. And he said, Go and tell these people, no matter how closely you listen, you'll never understand. No matter how closely you look, you'll never see. Make these people close-minded, plug their ears, shut their eyes. Otherwise they may see with their eyes, hear with their ears, and understand with their minds, and return and be healed. And I asked, How long, O Lord? And he replied, Until the cities lie in ruins, with no one living in them. The houses have no people, and the land is completely desolate. The Lord will send his people far away, and a large area in the middle of the land will be abandoned. Even if 1 out of 10 people is left in it, the land will be burned again. When a sacred oak or an oak is cut down, a stump is left. The holy seed will be the land's stump. You know, and I realize that can be a little depressing when you really stop and think about what he's saying. But I'm hoping that as we look at this message, that you'll start to see that there's a great deal of hope in seeing God for who he truly is. You know, sooner or later, it's going to happen to you. Someday, calamity will come crashing into your life. Sometimes there is a forewarning. Sometimes it just explodes under your feet. We all must take our turn at it. It happens to all of us. Life can go from 0 to panic attack in seconds, wrenching from your grasp anything resembling normal. The question is, in that moment, what are you going to do? How are you going to deal with it? Where are you going to deal with this? Christian author Philip Yancey tells this story. On February 25th, 2007, he was driving his Ford Explorer from Los Alamos, New Mexico to his home in Denver after a busy weekend of speaking. He was thinking about his wife Janet and the wedding of one of their friends that they were attending in a few weeks. He was really kind of not focusing on the road, but he was, you know, in the fading light, he didn't notice a sharp left curve ahead. Traveling at about 65 miles, he tried to negotiate it when his vehicle went fishtailing. Yancey describes the moment. I tried to correct, but as best as I can reconstruct what happened, my tire slipped off the edge of the asphalt into the dirt, and that started the Explorer rolling over sideways at least 3 times and probably more. Amazingly, the vehicle stopped right side up. All windows were broken. The skis, boots, laptop, computer, and suitcases that had been in the car were strewn over 100 feet or so in the dirt. When the emergency personnel arrived, they strapped him to a rigid bodyboard and immobilized his head for the hour-long ride to the town of Alamosa. The early images of Yancey's neck revealed pulverized C3 vertebrae. The emergency room surgeon told him that the break didn't touch his spinal cord, but likely punctured critical arteries that served the brain. Hours before, Yancey was on his way home to his wife of 37 years. Now, he said, he was alone in the busy emergency room of a small community hospital, wondering if he will live beyond the next few minutes. Just after her baby was born, Nancy Guthrie knew something was wrong. All the plans and dreams shifted when Hope was born with club feet, extreme lethargy, and an inability to suck, among other problems, all symptoms of Zellweger syndrome. a disorder that causes the body to retain the toxins it normally throws off. Hope lived for 198 days. In the meantime, Nancy and her husband were tested, and they both realized that they had the recessive gene for Zellweger syndrome to occur. The Guthries decided David would have a vasectomy to prevent another pregnancy. But 1 year later, 1 year after Hope died, Nancy was pregnant again. Paternal testing revealed their next child would also have Zellweger syndrome. Gabriel was born July 16th, 2001. They knew what to expect. Their son's first day was his best, and he went downhill from this. You know, that's how it happens. You're going through your ordinary life with its problematic rhythms, and suddenly, predictable rhythms, and suddenly you're sideswiped by a crisis. In 1993, I was working at Sears, serving part-time as a youth pastor, and at Del Rio Community Church in Port St. Lucie. And we had a great Sunday morning service. We were getting ready to go out to lunch because we had an evening Bible study with the youth group, and so I was planning on staying all day. I stood up, and I thought I had the beginnings of a migraine. All of a sudden, I couldn't see anymore. My vision doubled, and I couldn't focus on anything. I couldn't see to drive home. We managed to get a member of the church to drive me back to Tequesta and drop me off with my car. The next morning, I got up and we went to the doctor. They ran a bunch of tests, and then they sent me to a neurosurgeon who ran a bunch of tests, and then they sent me to the hospital and they ran a bunch of tests, and went to an eye exam, and went to all this and get a CAT scan and an EKG, ERG, and all that other stuff. No idea what was wrong. The next morning on Tuesday, I had called in sick to work because I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't see. Caught a call from the doctor at home. Michael, we believe you have multiple sclerosis. Admittedly, it's one time and it's not happened multiple times, so we can't definitely, but we're going to treat it as if you have MS. So we need you to come into the office as soon as you have somebody there who can drive you. I know you can't drive, but we need to start you on some medication and get you started so that we can help clear some of this up. I went from youth pastor, early 30s, just graduated seminary, to these visions of me in a wheelchair, crippled and unable to function, unable to contribute, unable to do the ministry God called me to do. All at the drop of a hat. You know, you hear the ambulance siren as it grows louder and louder. You've heard the sound many times before, but this time it's headed to your house, and the moment seems surreal, disjointed from reality. Things that are important just minutes before are completely irrelevant now. Telephone rings and you answer, and with no idea what is about to happen in your life, and right after you say hello, caller tells you the news. You stand there in a body-numbing disbelief as you hear that one of the most cherished people in the world to you is gone. There wasn't even time to say a final goodbye. There's a knock on the door, and you open it to a man, calls your name, and he hands you a legal document and a clipboard for you to sign, acknowledging your receipt of the divorce papers. You can feel time stand still as you take the pen and you sign your name. You know, you kind of knew your marriage was struggling, but you had no idea that your spouse was getting ready to leave you. You scribble your name and shut the door, and you can hardly breathe. Some of you haven't had one of those ripping experiences yet. What are you going to do when the bottom drops out? Some of you have lived those stories of something similar. You know that sense of desperation, so gut-wrenching you can't breathe. There's nothing you can do about what's happening. You feel weak, vulnerable, and afraid. What do? Where did your mind take you Was it a free-for-all? Or did you have something to hang on to, something to cling to? Someday trauma will walk right up and sock you in the teeth or punch you in the stomach. There are the times when you and I need the rock-solid things that do not and will not change. Things that we can cling to no matter the circumstances around us. And so that's one of the reasons that we're going to talk about seeing God for who He is tonight. We want to know Him, and the better we understand Him, the more we can cling to Him in those times of trial and struggle. All you will have in those defining moments is what you had before they hit you. So over the next several weeks, we're going to present 6 truths that you will need in that hour. They're simple, but they're deep. Basic, yet often so missing from our lives. And when they're missing, tragedy leaves a wake of ruin in our lives. I want you to open up your trauma box and see you have what it takes inside. Guys, I want to start with what's the most important truth you'll ever hear. What one overarching thought commands every dimension of your life and thinking between now and the day you breathe your last, the day you go home. Until we get this first thing nailed down, the inevitable crisis will be our undoing. Fix this in your life, though, and your purpose will be defined, your peace will be certain, and you'll have that solid foundation so that when the winds and the rain and the storms beat against you, you'll be able to stand. Basically, to say it like the psalmist did, the Lord, He is God. It's pretty simple, right? Pure and simple. And that's it. In North America, giving assent to the existence of God is no big deal. Over the years, the polls have reported the same thing. Around 90% of us say we believe in God. But when we're suddenly pushed over the edge of our comfort into chaos, our easy claims often, very often, prove to be hollow. Not for Isaiah. When he faced crisis, his testimony and actions show us a man who had his truth nailed down. That's what his Isaiah 6, 1-4. The crisis Isaiah was going through is King Hezekiah had died. The southern kingdom of the now divided Israel, King Uzziah had ruled over Judah for 52 years. He was dead, and don't read that too casually. Some of us can remember that feeling when President Kennedy was killed. For those who can't imagine hearing the news, Air Force One is down. The president is dead. Only for Isaiah it was worse. The throne of David was vacant at the worst possible time. Assyria's rise to power had been circulating for years, and the stories of their bulldozing armies traveled on the wind. Now Assyria, sensing its moment with Judah, is on the march, drawing near even as Judah is reeling from the death of their king. Everyone was preoccupied with world news and updates on Assyria. Dread and terror crawled up inside every citizen's heart. Isaiah's world was falling apart, but when he saw God for who He is, and he never mentions his king again. What does he see and say about God? And what do we need to know today? Well, first, Isaiah's dead, but God is alive. God lives on. Psalm 90, verse 2 says, "Before the mountains were born, before you gave birth to the earth and the world, before eternity to eternity, you are God." God was the living God when this universe exploded into existence. He was the living God when Socrates drank his poison. He was the living God when William Bradford governed Plymouth County. He was the living God in 1966 when Thomas Outzer proclaimed him dead and Time magazine put it on the front cover. And he will be living 10 trillion years from now when all the puny pot shots against his reality have sunk into oblivion like BBs at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord. There's not a single head of state in all the world who will be there in 50 years. The turnover in world leadership is 100%. In a brief 110 years, this planet will be populated by 10 billion brand new people, and all 6 billion of us alive today will have vanished off the earth like Uzziah. But not God. He never had a beginning, which means he depends on nothing for his existence. He has always been, and he will always will be. You can relax and know that God is alive. That in the midst of your crisis, in the midst of your struggle, in the midst of your hardship, God is alive. You can rely on that no matter what happens to you. No matter what the news is, no matter what you hear on the television. In the midst of the worst circumstance you can imagine, God is alive. And I know some of us, we struggle with understanding how God has always been, but he never had a beginning, and he'll never have an end, because he exists outside time. Time was created for us, and God created it. He is an ever-eternal being. We can be everlasting because we can live forever through him, but we're not eternal. We have a beginning. God doesn't. The second thing that you can see in all this is that God is in charge. I saw the Lord sitting on a throne. No vision of heaven has ever caught a glimpse of God, plowing a field or cutting the grass, filling out reports, or loading a truck. Heaven is not coming apart at the seam, barely holding out against its attackers. God is not having to catch a second job to make ends meet. He is never at wit's end with his heavenly realm, and he sits on a throne. All is at peace there, and he has absolute control. He's not fretting over what's going to happen tomorrow because he knows everything. The throne describes his right to rule the world. We do not give God authority over our lives. We do not make him Lord. He's already Lord. You didn't make him that. You didn't make him God. He was already there. All we're doing is we're acknowledging it. He is the Lord exercising authority, whether we like it, whether we admit it or not. Isaiah's crisis and mine are not beyond the scope of his lordship. 1 Corinthians 10:13 reminds us that no temptation has overtaken you except that is common to man. God is faithful, and he will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able. But with the temptation, he will also provide a way of escape so that you are able to bear it. That's it, guys. In the middle of the trauma, in the middle of the crisis, you can know that God is alive, and you can know that God is sovereign. God is in charge. God is boss. Nothing happens to us outside of his hand, because we are in the palm of his hand. Everything. Every circumstance, even the really bad traumas, ultimately God is in charge. Do we always understand? No, we can't always understand. But I thought I had MS. And by the way, just so you're aware, that was one time. It never happened again. Whatever it was, we're not sure. The doctor never figured it out, and that was 35 years ago. But the reality is that my God was in charge. My God was already taking care of it. I didn't need to have to fret over it. I didn't have to worry about it. Oh, I did. Don't get me wrong. I was terrified. I had these horrible visions of me trapped in a wheelchair and not being able to communicate and just being a vegetable. It didn't help that my doctor notified me of that on the phone. But the bottom line is God was still in charge and God was still alive. And if I'd had that nailed down at that point, if I had been absolutely convinced of this, maybe my reaction would have been very different. The third thing that we can get from all this is that God is omnipotent. Now, that's a big fancy word that just means he's all-powerful. The throne of his authority is not one among many. It is high and lifted up. I saw the Lord sitting upon a high and lofty throne. That God's throne is higher than every other throne signifies God's superior power to exercise his authority. This is the declaration of Scripture regarding him. My plan will take place, and I will do all my will. Isaiah 46:10. He does what he wants with the army of heaven and with the inhabitants of the earth. There is no one who can hold back his hand. Deuteronomy 4:35. By contrast, we are but creatures, weak because of our sin, mere specks on a smaller planet in a universe that is mind-boggling vast. The universe that God spoke into existence. Let there be, and it was. He didn't have to put in an 8-hour day. He didn't have to work hard. All he did was say, let there be, and it was. Let there be light, and there was light. We are dependent. We need power. Where does the power come from? Him and him alone. Our Lord God, maker of heaven and earth, sustainer of all things. To be gripped by the omnipotence of God is either marvelous because he is for us or terrifying because he is against us. Indifference to his power simply means we aren't paying attention. Almighty God, who is all-powerful, who cannot be limited in any way, shape, or form, loves us so much that he sent his Son to die for us. You think about that. God is the power. God has the power. And he is the power so that we can rely on him. He's our outsource. He's our power outside ourselves that enables us. God, according to Isaiah 6, is resplendent. I saw the Lord seated on a high and lofty throne, and his robe filled the temple. You know, we've seen paintings of monarchs with a train of their royal robe following a few feet behind them. We've seen pictures of brides with trains that stretch over the steps of the platform. What would the meaning be if that train filled the aisles and covered the seats and the choir loft and the whole building? Yet God's robe fills the entire heavenly temple. Fills the entire heavenly temple. I want you to have a picture of that, because that is not just, well, God's got a really big robe. It's his splendor and glory are peerless and beautiful. He is marked with dignity, wonderful to behold, and regal in his majesty. Our God is full of glory, and he is worthy of our worship. He is worthy of our honor. He is revered. Seraphim were standing above him. Each one had 6 wings, and 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And no one knows what these strange 6-winged creatures with feet and eyes and intelligence are. They never appear again in the Bible, at least not with the name seraphim. Given the grandeur of the scene and the power assigned to the angelic host, we do well not to picture chubby little babies fluttering about the Lord's ears. Okay. According to verse 4, when one of them speaks, the foundations of the doorway shake. It would be better to think of the Bible angels diving in formation before the presidential entourage and breaking the sound barrier just before his face. There are no puny or silly creatures in heaven, only magnificent ones. And get this, not even they can look upon the Lord, nor do they feel worthy even to leave their feet exposed in his presence. Think about that. You know, we talk about no man has seen the Lord except no man has seen the Father except he's seen the Son. And to look upon the Lord in the Old Testament was instant death. Moses got to see him as he passed by in the crevice of a rock. And in fact, just being in the presence of God in that format he came down from the mountain and he actually glowed. So scared the Jewish people that they made him cover his face until the glow faded from being in the presence of God. He is revered, and the angels have enough sense to know that they cannot look upon him. Great and good as they are, untainted by human sin, they revere their Maker in great humility. An angel terrifies a man with his brilliance and power, but angels themselves hide in lofty, holy fear and reverence from the face of God. And God is holy. And one called to another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. Here's the word the word holy, that carries us to the edge of our language when we talk about God. The word carries us to the brink, and from there on, the experience of God is beyond words. Holy we usually define as set apart, but how can God be set apart? The root of the word holy means to cut off or to separate. A holy thing is cut off from and separated from common, we should say secular use. Earthly things and persons are made holy when they are distinct from the world and devoted to God. So this Bible speaks of holy ground, holy assemblies, a holy nation, holy garments, a holy city, holy men, and holy women. Almost anything can become holy if it is separated from common use and devoted to God. But notice what happens when the definition is applied to God himself. For what can you separate God to make him holy? The very godness of God means that he is separate from all that is not God, which means that God is one of a kind, in a class by himself. In that sense, he is utterly holy, which is just another way to say that God is God. He's incomparable. You can call it his divinity, his greatness, his value as the pearl of great price. In the end, language runs out. The Lord is in his holy temple. Let everyone on earth be silent in his presence. Habakkuk 2:20. But before the silence and the shaking of the foundations and the smoke, we learn a seventh final thing from this about God. That God is glorious. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. His glory fills the whole earth. The glory of the God is the manifestation of his holiness. God is glorious means God's holiness has gone public. His glory is the open revelation of who he is. In Leviticus 10:3, God says, I will show my holiness to those who are near me, and I will reveal my glory before all the people. When God shows himself to be holy, we have seen God's glory. That's the kind of God I need, and that's the kind of God, when the world falls apart, when life crashes around your ears, to have that picture in your head, to know that God is holy, that God is righteous, that God is omnipotent and powerful, and God is alive and has always been alive and will always be alive. God is God. And so when the world crashes in around you, when the circumstances seem to overwhelm you, you can look up and say, he's God. He is who I can rely on. He is who I can depend on. And that's the kind of God I need, with the power to handle my problems. That day, all those years ago, after I got off the phone, I did what I always do when I'm struggling with something. I called one of my two prayer partners. Couldn't get a hold of Harvey because he lived in Texas, and it was the wrong kind of day, wrong time of day for that. So I ended up calling Randy. And we sat and prayed, and Randy got in his car and actually came down to Tequesta to spend some time with me, to pray with me, to let me know that they were concerned about me. What I found was that who I can rely on, who I can cling to, is God. That in the midst of everything that was bad, My God is more than able to be a conqueror. He's already taken care of it all. And sometimes, when the burden gets so heavy, and you just don't know how you're going to get through it, you can look up and say, Lord, He's God. He's glorious. He is revered. He is holy. He is alive. And He loves me. His glory is the open revelation of who God is. God has the power and the knowledge to guide me through the mazes I face, with beauty that captures me and glory to command my allegiance. A God who is